You're sitting at a gas station. The sign flickers. $7.79 a gallon. You blink. It doesn't change. A trucker behind you slams his door shut, muttering about skipping lunch to afford the next fill-up. Meanwhile, half a continent away, in Ottawa, a single cabinet meeting rewrote the global energy map, and Washington didn't even see it coming. Canada's decision to scale down oil exports to the U.S. A supply worth $103.3 billion in 2024, according to Statistics Canada, wasn't a spontaneous act of defiance, but the culmination of mounting trade friction, diplomatic stagnation, and strategic realignment. Following repeated threats from Washington to impose tariffs on Canadian EVs and rare earth exports, Ottawa began quietly diverting pipeline volumes through the Trans Mountain Expansion project toward Asia. Bloomberg reported that Canadian Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson authorized a capacity reallocation just days before former Prime Minister Trudeau met with executives from India's ONGC and China's CNOOC, signaling a clear pivot. U.S. officials, caught flat-footed, failed to preempt the move despite a February intelligence report by the Congressional Research Service that warned of imminent energy displacement risk from Canada. But why wasn't anyone in the West Wing paying attention? Since the export cuts began, U.S. crude inventories have dropped by 11.4 million barrels in 3 weeks, the sharpest decline since Hurricane Harvey, per the EIA. Gasoline prices surged from $3.38 to $4.81 nationally in just 10 days, with California surpassing $5.25 per gallon, according to AOA. This isn't a localized spike. It's a systemic tremor. Midwest refineries, which rely on Canadian heavy crude for over 60% of their feedstock, are running at 71% capacity, down from 89% a month prior. Bloomberg's Javier Blas noted that U.S. refiners are structurally mismatched to process anything other than Canadian grades, making substitutions not only expensive but technically inefficient. In Michigan, steel manufacturers are reporting 18 to 22% cost increases on oil-derived inputs like coke, and lubricants, forcing them to delay Q2 contracts. And at the consumer level, food prices are rising not because of drought, but because diesel deliveries to grocery distribution hubs are faltering. But the economic damage may pale in comparison to what's coming next. Behind the reallocation is a clear calculus. Beijing and New Delhi are paying premiums, offering 8 to 11% above spot prices for long-term contracts, and not attaching politically sensitive conditions. Reuters confirmed that China's CNOOC secured a 15-year deal to purchase 325,000 barrels per day from Suncor Energy, diverting volumes that previously went to the U.S. Gulf Coast. Indian Oil Corp has also reportedly inked a multi-year deal with Enbridge, leveraging Canada's upgraded Pacific infrastructure. Unlike the U.S., which has launched anti-dumping investigations into Canadian solar and battery exports, Asia is offering full-spectrum trade cooperation. Canadian Deputy Minister of International Trade Rob Stewart said in an internal memo leaked by The Logic, "Reliance on one volatile partner is no longer tenable. Diversification isn't ideological, it's existential." Still, the strategic fallout of Canada decoupling from U.S. energy markets is only beginning to unfold. With the Trans Mountain Expansion project fully online, Canada now has the capacity to ship over 890,000 barrels per day directly to global markets, bypassing U.S. transit routes. Germany's E.ON and Japan's Jericho have already signed preliminary agreements with Canadian suppliers, aiming to lock in LNG and crude volumes through 2040. According to Wood Mackenzie, these agreements could reroute up to 38% of Canadian oil exports away from North America by 2026. As European energy grids scramble to replace Russian gas, Canada is becoming a preferred alternative, not only due to reliability, but because it offers cleaner ESG ratings, which qualify for EU subsidies. Meanwhile, Asian buyers benefit from shorter maritime delivery times through Vancouver. U.S. influence in setting oil benchmarks, enforcing maritime choke points, or mediating energy disputes diminishes when supply bypasses American control entirely. If Washington thought OPEC was a challenge, it hasn't yet reckoned with a friendly neighbor turned independent energy broker. Goldman Sachs' March 2025 report forecasts a 0.8% contraction in second quarter GDP if Canadian supply disruption persists through June, citing ripple effects across manufacturing, transportation, and utility sectors. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis issued a warning last week about localized grid vulnerabilities in the Midwest and Northeast tied to refining bottlenecks and diminished strategic reserves. Illinois' largest utility, ComEd, stated that it has already triggered its Stage 2 emergency procurement plan to secure alternative diesel generation for hospitals and municipal services. Meanwhile, the American Chemistry Council reported that chemical manufacturers, who rely heavily on petroleum feedstocks, are operating at 63% capacity, down from 88% in January. The Institute for Supply Management's Manufacturing Index dropped to 46.3 in March, marking the lowest level since early 2020. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen stated during a Senate hearing, "We are not currently in recession, but we are dangerously close to crossing the threshold if the energy crisis remains unresolved." But if this is only the beginning of the unraveling, what strategic misstep is Washington about to make next? Trump's March proposal to slap a 100% tariff on Canadian autos, announced during a press briefing following a heated Oval Office meeting, immediately rattled investors and triggered a 7.2% drop in Ford and GM shares, both of which rely on cross-border parts from Ontario. But beneath the surface was a geopolitical miscalculation. Ottawa is a Tier 1 supplier for Lockheed Martin's F-35 Lightning II, producing landing gear components and fuselage parts valued at $19 billion over the contract's lifespan, according to U.S. Department of Defense procurement data. Cutting Canada out would delay at least 118 jet deliveries, impacting U.S. Air Force readiness and NATO obligations. Bloomberg's military analyst Tony Capaccio warned, targeting Canadian industry jeopardizes joint force interoperability and could force Ottawa to pivot toward European alternatives like Saab's Gripen, or even South Korea's KF-21. Washington's leverage, once military contracts, is now collateral in a broader economic standoff. But as Ottawa repositions its defense strategy, is this merely a tactical move or a strategic divorce? Since January, Canada has inked $6.3 billion in new arms export deals, excluding the U.S., with buyers in Indonesia, the Philippines, Ukraine, and the UAE, according to data from Canada's Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. For the first time in modern history, these deals exclude U.S. Defense Clause dependencies, allowing Canadian firms like General Dynamics Land Systems Canada and CAE Inc. to develop proprietary technologies without Washington's approval. Ottawa is also investing $2.2 billion into a new AI-driven battlefield tech R&D cluster in Vancouver, designed to mirror Israel's Rafael or France's Thales without relying on U.S. inputs. The goal, said Defense Minister Bill Blair during a recent Munich security conference, is sovereignty, not subordination. This isn't just diversification, it's decoupling. And as Canada invites European and Indo-Pacific partners into joint command simulations, U.S. influence over its northern neighbor's military doctrine may be eroding faster than anyone in the Pentagon is willing to admit. On March 25th, following leaked footage of Trump furiously berating Treasury officials in the Oval Office and demanding an immediate retaliatory economic order, markets responded with panic. The Dow Jones fell 837 points, the largest single-day drop in 6 months, while crude oil surged past $102 per barrel, fueled by fears of retaliatory supply freezes. The CBOE Volatility Index, or VIX, spiked 21%, signaling investor anxiety over an unstable policy environment. Treasury yields jumped as bondholders demanded higher risk premiums, while the Canadian dollar climbed 3.4% against the US dollar, its highest spike since 2016. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Credit Suisse strategist Zoltan Pozsar said, "Markets aren't reacting to fundamentals. They're reacting to governance chaos." Trump's attempt to reassert control through aggressive economic nationalism may have instead catalyzed the very instability his administration was trying to contain. But the deeper risk isn't volatility. It's what it reveals about America's diminishing ability to influence allies through economic coercion. The U.S.-Canada strategic alignment, once anchored by NAFTA, NORAD, and integrated energy corridors, is now fracturing under the weight of competing national priorities and deteriorating trust. In March 2025, Canada became a full observer in the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, marking its most explicit pivot toward Indo-Pacific security architecture independent of U.S. command. Simultaneously, Ottawa is negotiating currency swap agreements with the People's Bank of China, bypassing dollar-based settlement for key exports, according to Reuters. These moves signal more than policy divergence. They suggest Canada is re-engineering its role in a multipolar world. Former U.S. Ambassador to Canada Bruce Heyman told CNBC, "This isn't just drift, it's a recalibration of loyalties. If Washington can no longer rely on Canada to uphold its energy, defense, and financial architecture, the very foundation of its hemispheric influence is in question. And if the U.S. can't hold the line with its friendliest neighbor, how stable is its grip on the rest of the world?" This isn't just a dispute over pipelines or tariffs. It's a controlled detonation of assumptions that held the post-Cold War world together. One oil contract renegotiated. One jet deal threatened. One trade partner pivoting toward China. And suddenly, decades of U.S. dominance look a lot more fragile. Because if Canada can say no to Washington without fear of retaliation, what's stopping Germany, Japan, or Mexico from doing the same tomorrow? The alliances America built through oil, defense, and the dollar aren't guaranteed. They're negotiated. And right now, those negotiations are unraveling. So here's the question. If Canada just rewrote the rules, who's rewriting them next? Let us know in the comments, because what's coming next may not just challenge American power. It might redefine what power even means. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.